Welcome back to the Context Coaching Podcast. We're joined today by Chris Stevens, Athletic Director at Immanuel Catholic School.
Nope, just Immanuel.
I'll cut that out. Of Immanuel High School in Reedley, California. Coach, thanks for being on today.
Yes, sir. It's a pleasure, Justin. Appreciate you having me on.
All right, I would love for you to take us through your background and how you landed where you are now and all the fits and starts along the way and how this whole thing got started.
Yeah, man. Background for me, 30-year football coach. Never in my wildest dreams did I ever pledge allegiance to be an administrator. Thought that was never in my plan to be sitting in the seat I'm sitting in now. I'm in my second year as AD. Really just grew up in a football home. Dad was a head coach, AD my whole life. Knew what I wanted to do from an early age. So right after high school, played college ball, got into coaching right away after I graduated, never looked back. And so I've kind of been at a few different schools, both as an assistant, as a head. But again, just, plans that are not my own, and, got us up here into the Central Valley. I'm, born and raised in SoCal. Spent most of my life married, kids all down there, got up here to the Central Valley and became athletic director at a small private school right here, tucked in between Fresno and Visalia, and learning on the job, but loving it. Didn't have any high expectations for my first 2 years, just learning a lot, but really enjoying my time as an athletic director. And I still get to coach some football, so that's always a good thing too.
Yeah, it's always good when you get to continue to scratch the itch of your passion. So I'm glad you get to do that for the time being. We'll see how long that lasts.
Yeah.
But I want to push back a little bit and get into your coaching journey, right? You said you had a few stops. Talk a little bit about that and the path through each of those stops, and then we'll circle back to you as the AD.
Sure, absolutely. So after college, got right into teaching, coaching at a school down south where I was at, Ayala High School in Chino Hills. I was a teacher and coach there from about 94 till 96. So it was only about 3 years or 3 seasons. Moved over to Covina High School, got to coach and assist under Daryl Thomas, a good friend of mine down there. That was a one and done deal because there was another job that opened back up at Ayala. So I switched back to Ayala in 98 and coached there till about 2002. PE teacher, football coach, assistant the whole time. My father got a job at Ontario Christian, which is a small private school down south as well. He was the head coach there, started in 02. I came over to help him out in 03 at Ontario Christian. Coached with him for 2 years, along with my brother Cameron. So it was kind of cool. We had a family affair going on there. I took over the program in 05. So that was my first head coaching experience, was 2005. So being an assistant for 10 years and being under my dad for a lot of it was a real good benchmark, right? A good jump start for me in my coaching profession. And so I coached at OC from 05. My wife and I were expecting triplets in 2009, so I took that year off. I was still helping out. Dad took over again in 09, and I helped him up in the booth. I was just a press box coach, but I was still involved. It was good to do that, but had our kids, assisted for 09 and 10 and 11, took back over the program in 12, coached there 12 and 13. And then I moved over to Monrovia High School, did a 2-year stint at Monrovia. It's in the San Gabriel Valley down there. Beautiful school, great people. It was just too far of a drive. I was driving about an hour each way to and from school, just too much. We were trying to move out there. It didn't work out. So at that time, I moved back into Chino, football teaching at Chino Hills High School. I got that job in 16. And then I coached, and I was the head football coach there till 2019. Had a tragic event happen to me. I was kind of let go middle of the season, kind of strong arm. We can talk a little bit about that, but that was kind of a bummer. But I stayed on the campus and taught and did some things during COVID and that crazy time till about 2022. And then I went over and assisted a friend of mine at Altaloma High School, Coach Mark Pascarella, who's retired now, but good friend of mine who hired me. He was my first boss at Ayala back in '94. So that's a cool full circle story. Got my first job under him. And then I got to see him kind of step into retirement in 20 and 21. And that was kind of what led me up here. We were just looking for another gig. I was searching for another head coaching position. We were looking out of state. We were looking in Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, applications all over the nation, trying to leave California. Didn't like where it was going. God had different plans. He introduced me to Immanuel through a friend of mine who was the head coach up here. And, little did we know we'd be making our way up to the Central Valley. So that is my journey in a nutshell. 2 years as AD, still coaching, assisting now, back to being assistant. But that's us in a nutshell, man.
It's a lot. So
that's a lot. Yes.
As I shared at the conference, it's my show, so I get to talk about what I want. So I want to go right into this Chino Hills deal.
That's right.
I have two questions. Number one, what was it like coaching there during the period where the basketball team was what it was? And usually football is the tail that wags the dog, but in that case, it was probably very different. The second piece is I would love to know what your takeaways were from the experience of them choosing to go a different direction.
Sure. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, no, definitely. Football and basketball down there at that time. That was the Ball brothers were coming through there. LeVar Ball and his boys. I was hired in 16, so I was hired in the spring of 16. So I got to see Lonzo Ball's senior year. And the boys, and they were making their great run. That was the year they went 35-0. They were the best team, arguably nationally, right? All kinds of D1 talent. 3 guys from that team are now playing in the NBA, maybe 4, but it was just ridiculous. So I got hired in the spring. So going through that, I had a front row seat to that show because I ended up running the clock. I ended up running the scoreboard at the basketball games as I made my way through Chino Hills. It was exciting to watch. It was fun. It was definitely a different deal. Never seen high school talent on a court like that since or ever since, right? That was a one in a generation deal. But yeah, no, I loved it. It was a good school. It was real close to home. We grew up in that area, so we knew the community pretty well. And so got my foot in the door at that school football wise, and had a great run. We were continuing to build a program that was already kind of established. It was a really good high level football program. And just trying to keep the ship going straight. So we 16, 17, 18, and then 19, that my 4th year in, right? Built it, kind of keeping it going. 19 is when we had our little deal. At that time, we had a new superintendent, new principal, and there were some things that went down in the locker room at that time. And it was unfortunate for me. So I was charged with lack of supervision. And I think the article was saying something like, accepting what was going on in the locker room. They had to have a scapegoat. Parents were coming to the district, raising Cain, and unfortunately myself and our athletic director at the time got rolled out. And that was probably week 6 in the football season. We had just getting started with league, and they decided to go different directions. So one of my assistants took over and finished up the season. And, I was there teaching and just kept my job, just without the coaching part. So that was a tough deal. That was a real tough time for my wife and I, because that, honestly, Justin, we thought that was it. We thought that was the last stop in my tenure. We were going to have our kids coming up through there and graduating, and I was going to stay at Chino Hills for the rest of my days. That was our plan, right? And that changed in October of 2019.
All right, let's pivot to being an AD now. So through that experience, and now that you're stepping into your sophomore season as an athletic director, how does that, I don't want to call it disappointment, but how does that whole situation and circumstance inform the areas that are your soapboxes, so to speak, in regards to how you navigate the risk management component of your job?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just learning from that experience. Always, probably I think one of the questions that you had mentioned in some of the things we were going to talk about was, well, what's a failure you always kind of fall back on and learn from? Delegating and supervision being the key, but communication, always appropriate. Probably could have done a better job with that. So as an AD, one of my tasks is making sure that all my coaches are taking care of their kids, inside, outside facilities, never letting a day go by where, if there's something going on in their program, they need to address it like immediately. What happened to me was was a one-off. The kids it wasn't a constant thing going on in the locker room. It was just that one time where they just kind of got a little squirrely, I guess, lack of a better word. And so handling it and protocols and risk management, I thought that I handled it properly at the time. So again, over communicating that now as an AD and going, hey, make sure you are in your locker rooms, make sure you're around, make sure you're taking care of your kids. Don't leave the facility without everybody being out and doors locked and windows shut and all that good stuff. And don't leave the gym or the field without knowing that every kid's taken care of and on their way home. So just a tough life lesson to learn at that moment, but definitely made me a better administrator on the back end going through that again.
Right. And I was hinting at that, right? So it's like, all right, you're now in this AD role for the first time. You are the head coach for the first time in 2005, 2009, after serving, a 10-year apprenticeship under some really good coaches, including your father, right? It's like, what did you realize right away in both of those situations that you still needed to figure out? You're like, oh, I got this. And then it's like, nope, you don't.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting to go from being in charge of one program to being in charge of 18. There's good and bad with that. You kind of miss out on some of the relational side with the team and the boys. You still have it a little bit, but it's a little different. But then knowing, how my dad, watching him, being athletic director in his time at a very large school down in Chino Hills, just how he was with his coaches, being very relational, very open door policy, open every time, anytime, right? And so I think he had a good way of communicating and was able to bring coaches in, meet them at their level, talk to them about certain things, and go from there. Much like he did on the football field, but it was just different, right? You're dealing with kids on the field, you're dealing with coaches and adults behind the door. So a little bit different in the communication piece, but the delegation and the discipline and the structure never changed, right? The expectations were always up here with my dad. I learned that from him. So setting the bar high as far as that goes, and not expecting less. And so when you have those situations that come up, transitioning from working with athletes and parents a little bit more, now working with your coaches more, that doesn't change. You got expectations they have to meet, and you got to make sure that you're available to meet those coaches where they're at and deal with issues that may come up. And, Lord willing, you're not dealing with an issue that I had to deal with, and we haven't here. I'm surrounded, Justin, if I can just speak real quick. I got 16 of the 18 because my golf and my tennis coach, go season, rock star coaches. And I'm bragging about them all the time to people. Like, they make my job easy as an AD because they handle their business, and it's in ship shape, so it's good.
All right. On that, then, what have you learned from them that were aha moments for you, as you have extensive history, right? So 94 until 2020, you got 25 years of coaching experience. What have you now settled into this role? And you're saying these guys are rock stars and these ladies are rock stars. It's like, okay, cool. Share some of the things that you've learned from them.
Yeah. Just watching them at practice and how they're interacting with their athletes, very similar to, I watch and see similarities, both guys and gals, and how they interact with their kids relationally, but also demand and being very transactional. Like, we got a standard, we got to set the bar. So, what I've learned from them and watching them, and even watching them in the games, the communication is ongoing. And even at practice, I mean, my coaches they're constantly coaching. Like, if they have a 2-hour practice, they don't ever stop coaching. Even in the water breaks, they're coaching up kids. It's constant, right? It's not ever a lull. So I think what I'm learning from all of them and putting them all together is that you can have both. And there's a lot of people out there that would say a coach has to be more transformational, right? And building our kids. And we do that. We put a premium on, you know, athletes, yes, but you have a life beyond athletics. So we're going to get relational with you. We're going to teach you how to become a good citizen, all that stuff, right? We all know that. But not minimizing the transaction, like we're going to be successful and we are going to win. And we're not looking for anything less than a Valley championship or a CF championship. And, you know, not accepting whatever comes through their door, whoever comes through their door. We're not lowering the standard based on the cards that have been dealt us, I guess, if that makes sense.
For sure. And then how would you say they navigate the situations where we're holding the standard and we don't have the horses? And if the expectation is a championship, how are you working with them to redefine success at times? Or how are they doing that themselves to understand, the bodies in the room?
Yeah, it's not, and again, whether it's extra practice, extra shoot around time, extra time on the field, the court, they know the standard that I've set as a department. We have a meeting every August, right before school, the day before school, and we go over, list of expectations, and here's what we're demanding as an athletic department. And then getting to watch them go carry that out on the field, or the courts is just phenomenal. So you might have a coach who maybe is short on numbers. Okay, well, he has to adjust, based on he might only have 6 or 7 players on the basketball court in the program, but he coaches it like he has 3 levels of sport. I will brag about my girls basketball coach, Lauren LeBeau. They just won the Division IV CIF championship girls basketball this year. He didn't have a JV program as the season got started, and he probably had about 3 or 4 girls on the varsity level that were just basketball players. So he had to get athletes coming in from fall sports, train them up real quick, right? Keep the standard, train them up, get them going, build that JV program in season, which I thought was phenomenal, got that done, and then went on and took these girls who, were not athletically gifted, maybe were not, physically gifted, but turned them into champions because of his coaching, because of the high standard level and practice time and intentionality that he put into the girls, and they ended up winning it.
So you mentioned getting players from other sports, and if you've listened to any of these shows, you will know that I am super anti-sport specialization. And
yes,
I am curious how that falls on your campus and the fact that he went and got these other athletes. What is the culture like there? How do you share athletes? How do you encourage sports sampling and being a multi-sport athlete rather than what the youth sports industrial complex is preaching these days?
Yeah, that's a good way to put that. It is a complex. It's complex. We set the tone, Justin, from that first meeting. And one of my things in my coach's playbook is, in big caps with exclamation points, we share athletes. Bottom line, we are a school of just over 300 here in the high school. And we have a wonderful set of kids who do multiple sports. And so from the top, my superintendent, who is athletically driven, my high school principal, and these 2 guys are coaches on my staff. So I've got the superintendent, who's my head softball coach. I got my principal, who's the assistant tennis coach. And all the way down, we don't shy away from telling the kids, do what you can to do as much as you can, I guess. And so my job then is to communicate the coaches and make sure they are communicating on kids coming from fall into winter into spring, et cetera, et cetera. And that is because of the nature of our coaches and who they are. They're all rock stars, their own kings and queens of their own castles. Sometimes that's difficult, right? You have to have hard talks with coaches at the end of their season, transitioning into the next season. And these kids, these athletes, wanting to do all of it. How do you manage that? Got to talk. Can't assume that's just going to happen. You've got to communicate, because there's the parents, there's the kids, there's the coaches, there's me in the middle, there's everything happening, and there's a lot of talking heads and a lot of people. So getting coaches in the room, communicating about scheduling and here's what's going on. And this girl's going to this girl and this guy's going to this sport. It's vital. It's vital to make sure that the success of the kid and the health of the kid is maintained throughout all their seasons.
Yeah, no doubt. And how do you deal with it when the kid and or the parents and or the outside noise is encouraging those athletes to make a different decision?
Yeah, and so that becomes a talk with the parent. Those talks, you have to sit them down with the kid and say, look, you signed up for 4 things this year, and if you're going to be great at those 4 things, there's going to come some sacrifice with that. Your time, your energy, you're going to have to do some things to make it good, and make it well, and make sure that you are meeting the standard of all your coaches, and even performing arts or music or choir or all the other auxiliary things that are on campus that we boast very well in, and so you got to make that decision. So yeah, it's having those hard talks with mom and dad in the room, or and just letting them know, like, that's good, you want to do all those things, but here's the schedule and here's what's going to have to happen for you to be great at all of it.
Can you share a story about an athlete or multiple that you've come across in 30 years of doing this where they were pretty dug in that, let's say, hey, I'm a volleyball player and I'm going to play this year-round club and I don't have time to play soccer, or I don't have time to run track, and by the time they're graduating, they've turned a corner and realized the value that the other endeavors bring to them, that you can kind of hold up as a model to combat this sports specialization indoctrination that's going on?
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking like retrospect after they graduate, kind of like,
Even say, just even right now, like, I've got a gal on campus who's probably the best physically gifted athlete on this campus, who came in as, I play volleyball and I'm not interested in trying anything else. And, ultimately now as a junior, she's a 3-sport athlete and she's not even playing club anymore. And it's one of these things where she realized the value of doing these other things that we tried to share when she was a freshman. And it took her a little while. Sophomore year, she added soccer to the track that she added as a freshman. And this year she stopped doing track and she's diving. She's never done that before, but it's like, there's the talk track of the outside influencers, and then there's the reality of athletics. And ultimately, I am constantly battling against that narrative. And 3% of the world plays collegiate athletics. So it's like, at the end of the day, you want to push your chips in on 3%, great. No one's going to get in the way, but don't forget about these other deals.
Yep. No doubt. And kudos to you. I'm sure you had to have conversations with mom and dad at that moment, right? With that gal. But you also, as an AD, you have to sell it, right? You have to be kind of a salesman on the back end of that, saying, look at rock star volleyball player, and you give them all the stats and you show them all the stats of D1, D2, D3 college, like you said, a college athlete. Here are your chances. You might be that, and you might be on the right path to getting that done. But man, don't miss the boat on experiencing so much more in your high school career, because at the end of the day, you get an injury or something happens to you and volleyball's over. Now what? And looking back on, and I've had this, Justin, I've had football players graduate. I'm going football only, and they will come back and we'll talk, and they'll say, Coach, I remember when you were encouraging me to go run track, or encouraged when you were, go play basketball, or whatever it is, right? And I wish I would have, wish I could have. And we don't want our kids to do that, and I'll tell you just a quick story. My head track coach has done a great job selling his program and building his program. We went from a program of like 12 co-ed, he's boasting 60 players in this year alone. Why? He's an off-campus coach. He got on campus daily and was telling kids and telling some of our rock star sprinters, jumpers, boys that weren't doing track, they were doing baseball or whatever. And he said, look at what we can do as a team, as a unit. We can win this thing if you would just come out and try it. And then what he had to do is go to the spring sport that they were in and talk to that coach and communicate. and make sure it worked out for everybody. So baseball's first love for some of these guys, or boys volleyball, whatever it is, but he worked it out with the coaches. And man, we got guys that could walk out of here with being, 4-sport spring, fall, winters, 2 spring sports, varsity letterman, and man, it's just, he did a great job. And so to your point, you were able to sell that to mom and dad and get her going. She's going to look back on her career, and she might be playing high level volleyball, but man, all that other stuff. And you can speak to this too, Justin, in your communications with college coaches. What's one of the questions they ask you when they walk in the door and ask about an athlete? How many sports do they play?
9 times out of 10. Well, I also just show them the list. We've had 31 kids go to play college sports over the last 2 years, and it's maybe 3 of those were single sport athletes. Everyone else was 2, right? 25% were 3, and we had probably 4 or 5 of those that were 4. And that's ultimately, like you said, the track teams, the swimming and diving teams, the sports that have an individual component. I don't think people embrace the outside the box thinking about having kids moonlight in those sports, right? It doesn't take them away from their primary deal, right? We got a kid who's playing football at BYU that his senior season, he'd always been a track guy. He's like, I'm going to play baseball. And, was an all-league baseball player, and track was his primary deal, but he just went and did his training for his events, and then went and won the section title in the 100 and the 200. So it's like, how do you embrace that? How do you encourage kids to explore other options where they can help the school and the team, especially as a small school? To your point, we're selling you, hey, you can help us, right? Especially in roster sports like track or swimming, where the more bodies you have, the more points you get.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's talking, it's constant communication. He does that because he's off campus guy, but I'm on campus. So I walk around to different kids and just talk to them about their current sport. And, hey, would you try this? Would you try that? And it's just like, hey, I think you'd be great here. Give that a shot. The big thing, Justin, and maybe I would like to pick your brain on this one. Do you do a great job at when they come in as freshmen? Do you capture them early and say, look at all we have to offer? How many of these do you think you might want to do? Right. And how many of those kids, like you said, are just that one track? Nope, I'm football only. I'm volleyball only. How do you do that at the beginning of maybe their run at your school?
Well, great question. And what I can tell you is we are a unique place. And I think I shared this at the conference. So co-curricular participation at our school is obligatory for both faculty and for students. So they are going to do something in the co-curricular space every season of enrollment, whether that be rock climbing, surfing, theater, mock trial, field hockey, whatever it might be. Yeah. And so with incoming students, and we're a 50-50 boarding school, right? So we have kids coming from all over the place. And so in the fall, to your point, do we try to capture them early? We invite all new students, and returning for that matter, to participate in our preseason training, where the dorms get open 2 weeks early. They come back when sports start, and they basically have a week or 2 weeks of camp where they're not doing school, which I sell as a low stakes opportunity to get to know people that you don't know through sport, right? And so that's a big part. So we get a large push there. And then ultimately the ones that don't come to that when they get here, I'm walking through the dorms and it's like, hey, what are you doing for fall sports? Cool. You're playing football. What are you doing? I don't know. Okay, great. We need bodies at water polo. And it's like, go try it. And if you're miserable, come see me. 7 out of 10 times they end up sticking. The other 3, it's like, okay, hey, volleyball didn't work out because we have to cut kids, but you know who's always looking for bodies? Field hockey. They cut nobody. Go out there. Let's see what happens. And so if you can figure out a way to do something similar where you're capturing them early on enrollment, and you're almost not saying, what do you think you'll be involved in? It's like, what are you going to play? Choose. Here are your options. What are my options? Football, water polo, cross country. They all suck, right? It's like water polo, guys are trying to drown you while you play. Football, you're running into people all day. And cross country, like everything in your body is telling you to quit and you have to keep going. Like pick. Like at the end of the day, we're going to go try this. And
Yeah.
83% of our student body participates on an interscholastic team at some point. So the other thing I try to sell, just so you know, and for the listeners is, and I'll share this because people that know me that listen know that I'm a psycho, but it's like ultimately my household non-negotiables. I have 3 children. Okay. And this is like, we will never speak about these things. You're playing 3 sports a year and you're going on the 11-day backpacking trip as a sophomore. Like, we're not talking about that. Anything else we can negotiate. And so that bleeds into my approach as the athletic director, which is, look, you're playing 3 sports a year, like you should, at least through your sophomore year. And then we can reevaluate and figure out, okay, this is my path. And the way I framed that for my own children was, at the end of your sophomore year, if you decide you want to be elite at something, we can sit down and we can talk about what that looks like and whether you want to adopt that, right? Whether you want to choose that path or you want to just continue to play 3 sports. And both of my daughters who are in college now decided, yeah, that's not for me. I'm going to just stick playing 3 sports. We'll see what my son does, but I think the philosophy that bleeds in is, I want everybody to be involved, because ultimately think big picture college, right? How do you make the school smaller? You're already a small school, right? But these 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 student schools, how are you making the school smaller and finding your people? And the more you can be involved in, right, the more chance you have of finding your people.
Yeah, man. Now you said something, probably it's going to get a lot of thumbs down. Your sophomore year, you talk to your kids about your sophomore year being, okay, you want to go on an elite track, we'll get you there. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with parents coming up where they start that at age 4, right? Age 5. That's that crazy youth sport industrial complex you were mentioning earlier. I'm impressed, coach. I mean, that's wonderful. Get these kids in the door, your own kids. I'm doing the same thing with mine. Feed them the world and let them swallow whatever it tastes good, right? So same idea is, get into your freshman year, try it all, do it all, and then see where you might think that might where you might fit. So that's revolutionary. You're probably the 1% of parents and even just saying, hey, we'll let you kind of do it till your sophomore year and then we'll go on the track. That's good stuff.
Well, if you look at the data, and this is what I don't think when I asked you earlier about the noise, right? And you've been doing this for 25 years. I've been doing this for 25 years, right? I've seen this movie. Most parents who are going through it, it's their first time. So what is their source of information? Well, Jimmy's mom, while we're sitting on the sidelines, says this, and this is how you do it. It's like, cool. All right, I can give you the reality, or I can continue to allow you to believe something that's not true. And so I'll work with their club coaches. I'll call the coaches and be like, hey, I need you to have a different talk track with this person. I'll steer kids to clubs that have a similar philosophy in regards to how to grow human beings rather than how to get a paycheck coaching year round, right? And so right. I think from that standpoint, there was just some that posted the other day, the kids that are the best players at 10, less than 5% of the time are the best players when they get to be 18.
Isn't that something?
And okay, so here's the data, right? What does the data say about sport and overuse injuries, right? And how you mitigate those. Okay, it doesn't say play more of the same thing. It says cross-train. It says do these other things. So I think like at the end of the day, if people really want to know, and I invite those conversations, it's like, hey, what's the end game here? Well, I want to play collegiate X. Okay, fantastic. Let's talk about what that really looks like. Let's talk about how the transfer portal has completely and utterly changed high school recruiting, period. So the opportunities that were once there are no longer there. And so understand what the reality of the landscape is. And it's like, well, I played college athletics. My husband played college athletics. Our other kid plays college athletics. And I'm like, that's fantastic. That was in 1994. It's 2024. Like the landscape's changed. So you can believe what you want, or you can embrace the reality of the situation and work with people who know what's going on. And but just for everybody, there's zero chance I'm trying to say I'm the expert, But as I shared at the conference, I have 4,000 people in my phone. I call college coaches. Okay.
Yeah.
One of my former teachers and coaches is the head coach at the University of Virginia lacrosse. They've won 2 national championships. So if one of my lacrosse guys is saying, hey, and this happened this year, it's like, hey, I don't want to play basketball this year. And it's like, okay, cool. Why not? Well, I really want to get better at lacrosse and water polo. I said, cool. Hold on one second. Hey, coach, can you tell me what you think this guy should do to get better for lacrosse? And he's like, he should play basketball. Like, great. National champion coach.
There you
It
go.
was like, all right, appreciate it. And then Circle Bay still ended up not playing. But it's like, you can make choices and I'm going to support you. I just want those choices to be informed.
Yeah. Smart. No, well done. Yeah, that's good stuff. And that's what we want to give our kids, you know, those opportunities without being deluded or having delusions of grandeur. And I've seen it. I know you've seen it. Kids that start at 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. I've had it where kids have burnt out by their senior year. You know, that was football. You know, they played youth football. They got specialized training. They had a special coach. They did this, that, and the other. They're moving the same muscles for 10 years, not doing anything else. And number one, their bodies are breaking down. Number two, they're kind of done with the sport, you know, before they even get to the goal of college. So yeah, really interesting.
Well, and I think it's really informed myself as well, just to share this last piece and then we'll move on, is that coming back to my alma mater, coming back to a place where I realized early on I wasn't a mission appropriate coach for this place and I had to adjust because I was coming from the Sacramento Valley and where we played basketball 300 plus days a year. And getting down here, it was like, okay, it's a smaller community. Like these kids were sharing athletes, we're doing other things. And it's like, ultimately, I love the fact that I'm a seasonal coach. Like my season ends in February when we finish in the playoffs and my kids are like, coach, what do I need to do to get better? Go play lacrosse. What? Yeah, it's the same game. It's just on grass, right? Hey, go play softball. I got a kid who is a basketball only kid, freshman. Basically, that's all. She played football when she was younger. And it's like, I think I'm going to go play softball. Great. Never played before. Okay. She's starting. She's playing first base. She hit a double the other day to beat the number 2 team in the area who, you know, we caught lightning in a bottle. And this is a kid who's never played before. And so it's like, what are you learning there? And now she's like, well, what are you going to do in the fall? I just got to get ready for basketball season. Like my goal is to convince her, right, by the fall, no, I want you to play field hockey. I want you to jump in a pool and play water polo. I want you to do something else. There's plenty of time to do this other thing. And that's where I think we are constantly messaging against what's going on outside of our space. And that's the challenge that you face to get everybody to walk in alignment as to like, hey, you chose to come to school here, especially a school like yours. This is what we do here. If this ain't for you, like, cool, but know that going in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good.
Let me ask
Keep
this.
preaching it. Keep moving and grooving. Keep pushing them to different things, and they're going to be the most well-rounded kids coming out of your school.
Yeah, well, God, I feel like I'm on a soapbox right here, and I'm trying to interview you. I'll give you one more thing, and the whole reason that my household non-negotiables are what they are is because I'm trying to prepare my children to be adults, and ultimately, sports give you the best and most consistent feedback of anything when you fail. And going on a backpacking trip where you have to rely on the people around you to survive, right, teaches you to be part of something bigger than yourself. And so ultimately, like everything else, they can figure out if they can handle those 2 things. And so I'm going to go back to this early on. So, right, 25 years, how has your approach to coaching changed over that time? And then how has your approach to being an AD changed just over the last 2 years?
Yeah, I think changed football coaching wise. I honestly haven't. I was one way back when I was an assistant in 94. I was the same guy when I became a head coach. And then going back to being an assistant. I think I've been pretty consistent and steady with who I am and how I represent just myself or the program, both on and off the field and the coaching. I would just say that throughout my early years, my first 10 years of being an assistant, I was diving into every clinic, every coach, and anybody that would stop to listen to me, ask questions, going to college practice. I guess I was going to football school more often than I was after I became a head coach. I was still learning. I was still growing, but a lot of it was more managerial, organizational at that time, where the X's and O's part, I thought I had a pretty good grasp on in the first 10. So I think the only thing that maybe has changed a little bit is, and not that I've arrived, I hope I'm not coming off that way. I'm not saying that I'm the be all end all, but I feel like I got a pretty good grip on the game, that I backed off a little bit on the clinic part of learning and more administratively, if that makes any sense. So I think transitioning into athletic director, the conference was great. You know, the CSADA that's football school for me right now. I'm sitting under guys like you, people doing workshops, our main speakers, and I'm just learning the ins and outs of being an AD. So it's kind of like my transition into administrative ship, if that's even a word, is just now I'm trying to learn this AD role, still working on football, but learning now how to be a better AD.
So how has that impacted your ability to focus on football? And I ask because as a basketball coach, from, you know, March until mid-April, everybody's trying to hammer out their schedules for the next year. And I keep getting all these emails. Hey, can we look at the schedule? I'm like, look, man, I haven't even started to look at that. I'm in AD mode. Like, I'll get to this when I get to it.
Yeah. That's great. One of the things I learned very early, Justin, was you got to get your court sports together in the room and talk, even during football season. So, you know, I'm coaching all fall, right about the end of the year, because winter sports start in October, right? Kind of the end of October, they got to officially get going. So somewhere between the beginning of football and October, I just thought it 22nd, whatever, I got to meet with my volleyball coach, my 2 volleyball coaches, my 2 basketball coaches, and now even my wrestling coach. We just added wrestling last year. So we got to get everybody in the room who shares that gym, and we got to talk it out. We got to get that schedule hammered out. And sometimes it's most of the time it's good. I've got, again, coaches that are great, talk, coordinate, have their schedule. They're working well. And we're all new 2 years ago. The whole athletic staff, including myself, is brand new 2 years ago. So we're all learning this together. We're learning how to communicate together, but we got to get them in the room. Otherwise, it's a cluster, because now they're running their youth sports behind them and all of that. So it's huge. Just that whole talking it out and working through it.
So on that note, as an AD, right, you're in your sophomore season, so you are 20 months into this deal. What are some fumbles as you have tried to navigate certain challenges that have been really informative, that have been like you just said, we just added wrestling. Hey, my first year as the AD, hey, we're going to wrestle. 1 year experiment, we're done. We're not going back. Right. I learned a ton through that experience. Right. What are some things that you kind of had some really big wins on that maybe were a shift? And what are some things where it was like, I'm glad I tried that. That didn't work. And now I have a better understanding of what I need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. The wins was, like I mentioned before, having all the coaching staff, and that includes assistants, in the room at the same time one night right before we get going, and lay out, here's the expectations, here's protocols, here's policies. Because you get a turnaround of assistants, right? They're coming and going sometimes, and they're not staying. You're hoping your head coaches stay consistent, and thank the Lord, I've gotten 2 years out of these guys, and hopefully they stay around a little bit longer. So that's a big win. Communicating, getting them on a thread, all the head coaches on a text thread, so it's quick communication. That's been a big win, because sometimes they just need to ask a quick question. It doesn't need to be an email, it doesn't need to be a face-to-face. So that's been good as far as communication wise. The failures, I've also kind of overseen junior high as well. And so one of the things I learned early is make sure you get your junior high coordinator in the room as well. Because one thing I failed at this year, this was a big fail, is we got all that court stuff organized, right? All the coaches came in, they did their homework, they did what I asked them to do to get into the meeting. And then I switched the meeting on them. We went from, hey, we're going to plan out the rest of spring, to, we got to get our junior high kids on the court. Now you got to switch your club. It was a big fail on my part, because in January, when I started working on all that, I should have had junior high on the court, and I didn't. And that meeting was a big failure. So one thing I learned is, after football, this fall, when we get into Christmas break and then we turn that calendar over, I'm going to have the junior high basketball, organization on the court timed out. So when they come in, they see the block and they do that. So that was something I learned this year, even just a few weeks ago.
You're in a different situation as you just got to the school in the role that you're in. But one of the things that I had to figure out was when I was appointed or elevated to being the athletic director, my conversations with my coaching colleagues were sometimes received as dictates rather than suggestions, right? Where you're having a conversation, hey, I'm struggling with this. What do you think? Well, I think you should do this. And it's like, I had to figure out that because of the hat that we're now wearing, those things land differently, right? And so that was interesting. I don't know if you've run into that because you landed at the school in this role, but maybe in some of your previous stops when you went from being the assistant to the head coach in football, maybe. How do you navigate those? What are some things you learned through that? And what advice do you have for others?
Yeah. As far as delegating and commanding, is that kind of?
You and I are coaching, right? We're both assistants. You get elevated to the head coach.
Yeah.
We're talking about, hey, what's some areas that we can do to move the needle on this? And you're saying, well, have you thought about doing this? And all of a sudden it's like, well, I don't want to do that. And I walk away from it thinking that now I have to, when you were just making a suggestion, but because you now wear a different hat, I'm receiving it differently.
Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. I kind of had that at a little bit at Ontario Christian when my first job, my first head coaching gig. I was under my dad for 2 years and my brother was there. Great. He steps away and I took over in 05. It was everybody jumping ship and it wasn't a bad thing, but there were guys serving, as a support staff. There were gals serving support staff. There was a lot of coaches on the staff that, for better or for worse, decided it was time for them to step away because there was a coaching change, right? And it wasn't anything that I was doing wrong. It was just, hey, it's time for me to move on. So I was asking and recruiting all these people, right? Well, that also landed with some staff that did come over, right? And so they saw me a little bit different, and it wasn't so much a negative thing because I was an offensive coordinator for those 2 years. So I think the transition was a little bit easier because I was already demanding and saying, hey, we're doing this, we're going this route offensively. So when I became a head coach, I was doing more. I needed to delegate more. I didn't. I took it all. Okay, I'm going to run the show. This is going to be my show and we're going to do it this way. But there were some fractions, I guess, between me and some other coaches who were taking suggestions maybe from my dad or maybe from me that now was hearing me do this. And it was maybe a little bit different from my dad they were kind of looking side-eyed at me like, wait a minute, that's not how we do things. Well, that's how we're doing things now. And so there's a definitely a time, and as an AD, it's the same way. It's definitely a time where you're asking for help or you're asking for a submission of an opinion, and you're saying this is how we're doing it. The relational side of me says we're going to make this work because we're in this together. The commander in me, the AD, the administrator in me, or the head coach in me says, no, this is how we're doing it. You got to deal with it. And so those one of the things that I had to navigate even through that situation I was just talking about with the court, like, hey, we got to make this happen. You guys got to figure it out. They didn't like it, but it was a suggestion at the first meeting. It became a command at the next meeting. So I think it's just a matter of making sure when you're talking and communicating, your people that you're communicating with understand, is this a opinion-based conversation where I can get some feedback, or are you telling me this is what we got to do? And those are some of the things I'm learning how to do as well, taking over from my being a head coach into AD.
Yeah, no, that's great. Can we go to football for a second and talk about the strategy there? So my head coach and I talk a lot about how do we get to a place where you can just be the head coach and you're not coaching the line, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, so that you can focus on culture and people and not necessarily have to be in the trenches. How have you figured that out over the years?
Yeah. It goes back to our preseason meetings as an individual. I talk to each coach about their goals, both for the season, but also professionally. Like, hey, what do you want to do someday? You know, I want to find out too, the temperature in the room. How many of my guys want to be a head coach? How many of them want to be a coordinator? And then we talk about the steps to getting there, right? And so one of those steps, if I've got a guy who's an assistant or a position coach wants to be a coordinator, here's the steps. You got to do this. You got to learn, you know, your side of the ball. You got to learn how the defensive structure works against what you're trying to do as a coordinator, and then sit in on some of those things. If I got a coordinator that wants to be a head coach, they got to learn all aspects of the game. I can't emphasize that enough. It can't, as a coordinator, you're coming up and maybe you're a 3 to 5 year offensive guy. If you're going to be a head coach, you better know defense and you better know special teams. Hands down. Like, as much as you may not specialize in those things, but you better know them, and you better know how to delegate and want what you want in your program for that. So it's conversations I'm having with them. I can't be a head coach and not know what's going on the defensive side of the ball or special teams. I may have an expertise at quarterbacks, and I may run the offense well, call plays, but as a head, you know, so you got to train your guys up, and you got to let them know you might have a specific area of expertise, which is great. And that's what you played, and maybe that's what you coached for X amount of years. But if you want to be a coordinator, here's your steps. And then if you want to be a head coach, here's your steps. And all that takes place early on before the season.
Yeah. So what do you do, and how do you juggle that, right? You've been at a bunch of different places where you've had different constraints, so to speak, right? How do you deal with the times when it's not personnel, right? When it's not your short bodies, you're just like, I have to learn to trust this guy to do his job.
Yeah, no, and coaching the coaches is big. You gotta make sure that you've equipped them and put tools in their tool belt so they can be successful. If you're lacking in a certain position, then it's you as the head coach, or maybe you as the coordinator, going with that coach and saying, all right, how do we make, you know, lemonade out of lemons right now? And how do we do this? And maybe it's more time, more individual time, you know, with those guys. And maybe it's a different voice. Maybe it's the head coach coming in and saying, look, we got to do something different. Here's how we're going to do it, and having a plan for that. But I've been around coaches too, where we've been in meetings and they'll tell me that. They'll say, Coach, we just can't get this done. And the next year, that guy might not be coaching for me, or he may not be coaching for me long before the end of the season. It's not a quitter's attitude, it's mentality. It's like, how are we going to make this work and being victorious in that process of getting these guys to function?
Love that. All right. Let's wrap up with this. What is the best thing you do in your program that you think has the largest ripple effect on your culture? And it could be a football deal you do. It could be something that your tennis coach does, but like something that you can offer to other people as a tangible thing, not something verbose in the ether, but like, hey, we do this, and it has had a large ripple effect on what we do. And just as an example, like as a basketball coach, like we hug at the beginning of practice, we hug at the end of practice, before games, after games, kind of as a way to ground ourselves and make sure that, you know, the athletes know that we're all together in this, and that at the end of the day, whatever frustrations happen, like, you know, we're family for the most part, right? And so give me something like that.
Yeah, I love that. And by the way, that's growing men, that's growing boys into men and girls into women, of being respectful of each other, loving each other, saying thank you after practice to your coach, you know, shaking hands. Thank you, coach, for your time. Building that in there. So I love that. That's a good nugget right there. I would say for both me as a head coach and me as an AD, it's also off the field stuff that are as important as on the field stuff or in the office stuff. Something I did football wise is we would have, I'd have the boys over to the house on Monday nights. We'd watch Monday Night Football. We'd feed them, and we'd talk about life. Very little football, right? Getting them off the field and letting them know you're human, you're not a robot. And also getting to know them a little bit, likes, dislikes, just having candid conversations, you know, watching the game. So I do that with my AD, with my coaches. We meet once a month in the morning before school. I invite every head coach and assistants. Most of the time they can't get the assistants there, but being off the field, off the court, And I just want to hear from them. So that has been a really good win. Athletic department as a whole, I'll bring donuts, we'll have coffee, and we just sit around for an hour. And I ask each coach, give me an update on your program. How are things going? How are things going in life? How's your spouse? How's your kids? Like, what's going on with you? So I'm getting to know them too, as human beings off the court, off the field. That's been a little transformational, especially all of us being new in our second year, just kind of hearing each other and talking about struggles and things has been very big win for us as an athletic department. So, my encouragement to any ADs, and I know time is critical and you got to have the support system behind you to do it. But once a month, I tell the coaches, can you give me once a month? And most of them can. Most of them can find time to get up early and get here, and we just sit down and talk, and that's been really good.
Yeah, I love that. And it's been one of these things where I want to implement something similar, and I've always got an excuse as far as like why it doesn't work. And it's a challenge, personal challenge to get that done. So I appreciate you sharing that. Coach, if anybody wants to catch up with you, follow the successes or challenges that you're going through, where can they find you?
Yeah. Well, I got a personal, Instagram and Twitter, Coach Stevens 94. Both of those handles. And then my wife and I are co-hosting the Friday Night Live podcast. We're on Twitter and Instagram. We get to sit down and meet coaches across the country at all different levels and talk life. And that's basically what the podcast is all about. It's not just X's and O's. We do talk about that, but we just get to know these coaches, their spouses. And sometimes my wife will do a one-on-one with a coach's wife. I'll do a one-on-one with a coach. It's great. So the Friday Night Live podcast, it's on Twitter and Instagram. Love to have you come check us out.
Sounds great. Looking forward to checking that out, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for being
man. Coach, thank you for having me. I appreciate you, man. It's been good to meet you and get to know you.